Hello and welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be mixing a bunch of drums and showing my process for them. So I have this beat that I'm currently working on. It sounds like this. I don't have anything on the mixer channel yet, and I haven't started most of my mixing process aside from just leveling whatever this is called, the channel rack. So let's start by putting everything on the mixer channel. So I've got my kick and bass. And the first thing I'm going to do is take my bass, in this case it's a sine bass, and route it to another thing, and then put my 808 preset on it. Now it says 808s, but I use it for anything that I've, in any kind of bass or sub-frequency sort of thing that I'm doing. So on this, I have pretty much everything turned off currently, except for a wave shaper, a peak controller, which we'll get to, and a limiter. So let's look at the wave shaper, make sure it's getting up to the top of that. I'll push a little bit more into this. This is a soft clipper, by the way, and sometimes I'll also add a little bit of distortion by moving this up or down. And we have a limiter, which I'm going to use for sidechaining later. Okay, and then I'm going to take my kick and I'm going to put on it, or put my kick preset on it, which is similar. Currently I have everything but the wave shaper turned off as well, and in this case I'm hard clipping, and then again I'm adding a little bit of distortion on the top. Sometimes I'll use these other things, but again, they're turned off for now. And you'll notice that with my 808 I already have this centered, but yeah, we can make this completely mono. My kick is completely mono. And then you'll see something somewhat similar with some of my other drum sounds. So let's go ahead and put everything else also on the mixer channel. So if you don't know the shortcut for what I just did, I just highlighted all these cells and then hit Control L, and it automatically puts everything on the mixer channel for you. Okay, so I've got my main snare next, and I've got two different sounds layered. One that's more of a main snare sound, and one that's a little bit more noisy. So here's the noisy one. Got that more high end on it, and then here's the main snare sound. Anyway, I'm going to take both of these and route them to the same mixer track, and I'm going to put on it my preset for main snares and claps. And again, I've got a peak controller, which we'll talk about later. Got an EQ, where I'm cutting out things that are too low in frequency. I've got another soft clipper. And you'll notice I'm also merging the total signal by about 50%. Even though I'm already merging this one, I kind of did that to counteract the panning that I did. Okay, and I'm also going to separate the noisy part of this snare sound. So this is almost entirely separated. This is, let's make that 50% merged. And then the signal altogether is getting merged another 50%. So this sound is like almost entirely mono. This one's going to be a little bit more separated, and altogether it's going to be mostly mono with, some separation going on. In fact, I'm going to merge this a little bit more. Something else I'll sometimes do with a main snare clap is I'll add reverb to one of the two layers if I have multiple layers. So, and that really depends on what the sounds are that I'm using. In this case, if I were to do that, which I might, I'm going to add it to the noisy one that's separated. So let's go ahead and do that and see what we can come up with. And I'm going to mix this way back. And one of the reasons I have it mixed mostly out and you can just barely hear it is later I'm going to add compression and other things, which is going to bring the level of that reverb up. So if I make it too loud now, it's going to be way too loud later. Okay, with my main hat, I like to merge this about 50%. Typically that's what I do with the main snare clap sound anyway. The reason I did more this time is because I separated this one layer so much, and it was to kind of pull it in a little bit more. And then my non-main sounds, so in this case it's just two open hats, I'm going to separate them. If I had like counter snares or counter claps or counter rims or other types of open hats, or sometimes I'll do this with like secondary hats as well, I'm going to just pretty much separate them completely. So put this like at like 95 to 100% for the separation. And one thing you need to keep in mind when you are separating things like this is that makes them louder, like it's going to bring the volume overall up. So you tend to need to compensate by lowering the volume a bit. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to put all my drum sounds that I just added, not including the 808, and route them all to one place, and then put a drum preset on them. So I'm going to take all these sounds, put them over here, and then put on my drums preset. You'll notice I've got a bunch of stuff going on with my drums preset. Let's turn this off for now. First thing on here is an EQ. I tend to boost this region, which is why I automatically have it boosted. And in this case, I think I'm going to keep that, maybe just lower it a bit. It looks like my hat has some low-end information in it, so let's actually look at it. Yeah, we got plenty of low-end information on this hat. So to get rid of it, I'm going to go to the default EQ here and just cut out everything below like 581 hertz. Because I don't need any of that on a hat. And I'm going to do the same thing for these as well. I'm not getting all this low-end information from the hats anymore. Okay, the next thing in the chain for my drums is a wave shaper. So same thing that was on the kick and the main snare. In this case, it's a hard clip. I might soft clip in this case just to see what it sounds like, and add a little bit of distortion. Okay, in this case I'm not using a compressor or a limiter, however I am using some parallel compression. So I've actually created my own parallel compression, whatever you want to call this, patch or preset, which is essentially, well, it's a preset for parallel compression. And if we look under the hood, I'm just resetting these and putting them where I like them. If we look under the hood, this is what it is. So it's a bunch of like soft clipping, compression, saturation, and distortion all put together essentially. In fact, one thing I'm going to go ahead and adjust is the compression, because I did it a little bit too much when I made this preset. I'm also going to increase the attack to match the BPM of the song, roughly. Okay, and this is actually the parallel processing that's going on right now that I'm adjusting. So I didn't really explain this. I've got the main signal just straight up being sent to a soft clipper, and then I've got the same signal going through all these processes. That's what parallel compression is. As you split the signal off into two, you process one half of those signals, keep the original, and then you blend those together, and that's essentially what I'm doing here. So right now I'm affecting the compression and the soft clipping of the parallel processed signal. The original signal isn't being changed here. Okay, so now that I've adjusted the compression and all that, so I've got these knobs which will, you know, change different things. Here's the dry signal, here's the wet parallel process signal. So currently I have the dry signal 100% on, so it's not being adjusted at all here. As you can see here, 0 decibels. If I bring this back, it will lower this to negative 8.3 decibels. So with this all the way to the right here, my dry signal, my original drum signal, isn't being changed at all. And then this is the wet signal. So this is the signal for all the processing that's going on. So the saturation, the compression, the soft clipping, all that stuff over here is being affected by this. So I like to start with it up here so that I'm not adding too much wet signal. In fact, I'm going to bring it back just a little bit. And then over here I've got knobs that will affect the soft clipping and the saturation, as well as saturation and distortion. So with this knob I tend not to go too much past here, because then the way that the volumes balance before and after it don't really work super well, and I didn't know how to fix it, so I just don't go too much above here. So I'm going to start with it down here, start with this over here, and let's see what it sounds like before. And then let's see what it sounds like after. one thing I'm going to do is increase the wet volume a bit, and then I'm also going to use a high and low cut. So I'm going to high cut so that the hats aren't going to get too loud, and then I'm going to low cut so that, well, the main reason I low cut here is, and you don't necessarily have to, but with that parallel processing, I'm actually adding low end to things like the hats and the snares and stuff like that, which could get muddy and could get in the way of the main kick. So I tend to cut those lower frequencies out, and we can see that right here. So here I am taking out some of these lower frequencies, and then here I'm taking out some of the higher frequencies so that the hats don't get too loud. Okay, so as far as mixing the drums on their own, that's more or less it. Now I'm going to do things with sidechaining and other stuff to help them kind of blend with the melody a little bit more and to help them hit a little bit harder. So the first thing I'm going to do is take my kick and sidechain it to both the 808 channel and the melodies. So let's go to the 808, let's go to the Fruity Limiter, and let's go ahead and start ducking the volume at the very beginning of it when the kick hits. Okay, so we're ducking the volume of the 808 every time the kick comes in, just for a brief moment. Let's do something similar with the melody. So I've actually got a patcher preset here called sidechain input to low. I forget what it says. Essentially, you're just sidechaining low frequencies of whatever, using a kick or whatever else you want to use to sidechain. So I'm going to add an audio thing here for the kick, route it to the compressor. And if we look at the multiband compressor here, we can see that 77 Hertz is where our cutoff is. So I'm actually going to increase this a little bit to 104. That's good enough. And then we're going to duck these lower frequencies when the kick comes in. So this is for the melody. So those lower frequencies are all we're going to be affecting here. It's just to kind of help a little bit with clarity with those kicks. Okay, and then on a similar note, I've got a peak controller, which I said we would get to on the 808. So what I'm going to do on the melody is come over to the EQ at the very beginning of it, and you can see I'm kind of boosting some frequencies in the melody. I've got a band over here that's it's lower than the low cut is, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to link to controller, and I'm going to link it to the 808 peak controller, and then set it to inverted. And then I've got the settings for that set up so that every time that 808 comes in, it's going to duck these lower frequencies. So we can pull up the peak controller so that we can adjust it here. Something else I like to do, and I'm going to do this with the Fruity compressor just so that I can save on some CPU. I'm going to sidechain the main snare clap to the 808, which sounds kind of weird, but my thinking behind this is when the snare clap hits, typically the 808 or the sub bass is not hitting at that same moment. Normally it hit a second ago, and then that tail is playing out, and then that's when the snare clap tends to come in and hit. So my idea is if you duck a little bit of that volume of the tail of the 808, it's probably not going to be audible, especially if you do it really quickly. And that makes a little bit of extra room and helps that main snare clap just shine through a little bit more. And if we look at the limiter, we can see what's actually happening when I do that. So you can see there's a little bit of space that's carved out when that snare hits. And I probably want this to be not as wide. And again, my thinking is at this point in the sub bass, you're not really as worried about it being as present and as loud as you are at the beginning of it. So taking a little bit of this volume out just to make room for something else that's important makes sense to me. And I'm just using this as a visual. I'm going to take it off now. That way I'm not using as much CPU. Okay, So let's turn all of our effects off and then turn them back on and compare, how everything sounds. So turning all these off. Here's what it sounds like. Sounds pretty good, but things aren't really as present as they could be. So here's with everything turned off. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed, hopefully you learned a thing or two, and if you see anything that I can actually improve in this process, feel free to let me know down in the comments. And if you have anything else you want to see in the future, whether it be mixing, mastering, or just making beats and stuff like that, let me know that down in the comments. Hope you enjoyed, and have a good one.